Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The first time I noticed Mrs. Henderson staring at me from behind her lace curtains, I thought nothing of it. Old ladies in small towns do that sort of thing. But when she dropped her coffee mug right there on her porch, shattering it into 100 pieces the moment our eyes met, that's when I knew something was wrong. Very, very wrong. If you've ever felt like everyone around you knows something you don't, like they're all in on some cosmic joke and you're the punchline, then you need to hear what happened to me in Millbrook, Vermont. And if you make it to the end of this story, I need you to tell me what you think they knew, because I still don't have all the answers. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see something I missed. The story begins now. I moved to Millbrook 3 months ago, fresh start, new job at the local library, rent so cheap it felt like stealing. The kind of place where Main Street still had a real soda fountain, where the pharmacy owner knew everyone's prescriptions by heart, where autumn felt like it was painted by Norman Rockwell himself. Perfect small-town America, or so I thought. My name is Sarah Chen, and before you ask, yes, I'm the only Asian person in a town of 1,200. But that never bothered me. I grew up in places like this. Military brat. Dad was stationed all over. Small bases, smaller towns. I knew the rhythm, the polite curiosity, the well-meaning questions about where I'm really from, but Millbrook was different. It started with the stairs. Not the usual, oh, someone new kind of stairs. These were heavier, like people were looking through me, or maybe looking for something in me. Mrs. Henderson was just the first one I caught. The second week I was shelving returns at the library when Tommy Garrett, 11 years old, gap-toothed, usually bouncing off the walls, walked up to me. He stood there for a full minute, just watching. When I smiled and asked if he needed help finding a book, he whispered something that made my skin crawl. My mom says I'm not supposed to talk to you, but I think you seem nice. Before I could ask what he meant, he ran off. That night, I called my best friend Maya back in Boston. Told her about the weird vibes I was getting. Small towns, girl, she laughed. They probably haven't seen an Asian person since ever, give it time. But it wasn't that. I knew what that felt like. This was something else. The third week, things escalated. I'd walk into the diner. Conversations would stop mid-sentence. Not gradually fade out like when any stranger walks in. Stop. Like someone had hit pause on a record player. Forks suspended halfway to mouths. Coffee cups frozen in mid-sip. Then they'd recover. Badly. Forced smiles. Too bright greetings. The waitress, Janet, would pour my coffee with shaking hands. Actually shaking. I started drinking my coffee black because I was afraid she'd spill the cream. Beautiful weather we're having, she'd say, every single time. Even when it was pouring rain. I tried to make friends. Joined the book club. Showed up with homemade brownies and my well-worn copy of The Secret History. But when I walked into Helen Morrison's living room, 7 women sitting in a perfect circle. They all turned to look at me in unison, like synchronized swimmers, or marionettes pulled by the same string. Sarah, Helen said, her voice pitched too high, we weren't expecting you. But I RSVP'd, I said, holding up my phone. You said 7 o'clock? They exchanged glances. Quick, darting looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. Of course, Helen recovered. Of course you did. Please, sit. I sat. They discussed the book. I tried to participate. But every time I spoke, they'd lean away slightly, unconsciously, like magnets repelling. When I reached for a cookie, Margaret Peters actually flinched. I left early. Said I had a headache. Nobody tried to stop me. Walking home that night, and this is where things get really strange, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me, multiple sets, but every time I turned around, empty sidewalk, just the yellow pools of streetlight and the rustle of October leaves. But shadows moved in my peripheral vision, shapes in windows, curtains falling back into place just a second too late. The whole town was watching me. By the 4th week, I'd started keeping a journal. Not because I'm naturally paranoid, though Maya would disagree, but because I needed to know if I was imagining things. Documenting the strangeness became my anchor to reality. October 15th, grocery store. Every person in every aisle turned to watch me pass, like a wave. Mrs. Kowalski in produce, the teenage stock boys, even little Emma Watson in her shopping cart, all tracking my movement. October 17th, tried to get a haircut. Barber said he was all booked up. I could see his appointment book. It was empty. October 19th. Found a note under my windshield wiper. Single word, sorry, no explanation, no signature. But it was October 23rd when things took a darker turn. I was working late at the library. October means Halloween displays, and I'd stayed after hours to set up our local ghost stories exhibit. The library was built in 1887, all creaking wood and narrow staircases. The kind of place that feels haunted even at noon. At night, alone, it felt alive. I was in the archives looking for old newspaper clippings about Millbrook hauntings when I heard it. Whispering. Soft, urgent voices coming from somewhere deeper in the stacks. Can't keep this up much longer. She's going to figure it out. What if she remembers? I froze. They were talking about me. Had to be. Who else could she be? I crept closer, grateful for the thick carpet that muffled my footsteps. The voices became clearer. I recognized them. Harold from the hardware store and Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church. 23 years, Harold was saying. 23 years we've kept this town safe. We can't break now. But look at her, Pastor Williams replied. She has no idea. Maybe that's Mercy. Mercy? Harold's laugh was bitter. You call this mercy? Watching her walk around like nothing happened, Pastor Williams finished. I know, but what's the alternative? Tell her the truth? Watch her world collapse? My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. What truth? What happened 23 years ago? I'd have been 4 years old, too young to remember much of anything. A floorboard creaked under my foot. The whispering stopped. Did you hear that? Harold's voice was sharp now, scared. I held my breath, pressed myself against the shelf. A book dug into my spine. Something about colonial cemetery records. Footsteps, coming closer. I could see Harold's shadow stretching across the floor, distorted by the emergency lighting. Then, Pastor Williams's hand on his shoulder. Let it be, Harold. If she heard, then maybe it's time. They left through the back exit. I stayed frozen against that shelf for another 20 minutes, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. When I finally made it to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. That night, I called my parents. Dad answered on the second ring, even though it was past midnight. Sarah, what's wrong? Dad, we lived in Vermont when I was little, right? Before Fort Campbell? Silence. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Why are you asking about that? I'm in Vermont now. Little town called Millbrook. And people here, they're acting like they know me. Like something happened here. More silence. Then Mom's voice in the background. Is that Sarah? What's wrong? Nothing, Dad said too quickly. Sarah, sweetie, maybe you should come home for a visit. Take a long weekend. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Nothing. We barely remember Vermont. You were so young. We were only there a few months. Lie, My father, who taught me about honor and truth and standing up straight, was lying to me. I could hear it in every word. Dad, get some sleep, Sarah, and be careful. He hung up before I could ask what I should be careful of. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every sound, every creak of my old rental house sent my heart racing. I started leaving lights on, started checking my locks obsessively, started wondering if the whole town was collectively insane or if I was. Then I found the photo album. I was cleaning out the attic. The landlord had said I could store some boxes up there. When I knocked over a stack of old board games, mouse-eaten Monopoly, mildewed Scrabble, and underneath, a leather-bound album labeled Millbrook Memories 2001. 2001, 23 years ago, exactly what Harold had mentioned. I sat on the dusty attic floor and opened it. The first few pages, normal small-town stuff. 4th of July parade, church bake sale, kids playing in the park. Then I turned the page and my blood turned to ice. It was me, 4-year-old me, in a yellow sundress I vaguely remembered standing in front of the Millbrook Library. The same library where I now worked. But that wasn't the disturbing part. In every photo I appeared in, and there were dozens, everyone else's faces had been scratched out, methodically, carefully, with something sharp. Only my face remained untouched, surrounded by faceless people. Under one photo, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "The one who got away." My hands were trembling as I flipped through page after page. Me at the diner. The same booth I'd sat in last week. Me at the Halloween parade. Me with other children, their faces all obliterated, playing in a yard I didn't remember. And then, the newspaper clipping. Local family dies in tragic fire. 4-year-old daughter only survivor. The text was too faded to read clearly, but I could make out some words. Chen family, October 31st. Investigators baffled, accelerant. No signs of forced entry. Chen. My last name, my family. But that couldn't be right. My parents were alive. I'd just talked to my father. My mother had been in the background. Unless, the next page made me drop the album. It was a photo of a family. Asian couple, early 30s, with a little girl between them. The adults' faces had been scratched out, but the child's remained. The child was me, but the adults, they weren't my parents. I'd never seen them before in my life. Or had I? Something flickered at the edge of my memory, like trying to remember a dream. A woman's voice, singing. The smell of jasmine tea, a man's laugh, deep and warm. Then, fire. Always fire. Smoke so thick I couldn't breathe. Someone carrying me, running, screaming. I grabbed my phone and called my parents again. Mom answered this time. "Sarah, it's 3 a.m. "Mom, am I adopted?" The silence stretched like taffy. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I found photos of me in Millbrook, with people who died in a fire, people named Chen." I heard her sharp intake of breath. Dad's voice in the background. "What's happening? Is she okay?" "Sarah, listen to me," Mom said, her voice steady but strained. "We love you. We've always loved you, from the moment you came into our lives. So, it's true." My voice sounded hollow. "I'm not your biological daughter." "You are our daughter," she said fiercely. "In every way that matters. We couldn't have children, and then you needed us, and we needed you. The fire was real, your birth parents. They died. You were the only survivor. The authorities couldn't find any living relatives. You were so traumatized. You didn't speak for months, didn't remember anything. The psychiatrist said it was better that way, said we should let you create new memories, safe memories." I was crying now, silent tears dripping onto the photo album. But why is everyone in this town acting so strange? Why are they watching me? Another pause. Then Dad's voice, taking over the phone. "Because they remember, Sarah. Even if you don't, they remember that night. They remember what happened. And they've been waiting 23 years for you to come back." "What happened?" I whispered. "What really happened?" "We don't know," he admitted. "The investigation, it was closed too quickly. The fire chief, the police, everyone just wanted it buried. Said it was a gas leak, but there were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That someone in that town, someone killed them, killed your birth parents, and that the whole town knew who, that they've been living with that secret ever since." The photo album felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "They're not watching me because I'm new," I said slowly. "They're watching me because they think I came back for revenge, for answers. Sarah, please, come home, tonight. Just get in your car and drive." But I was already shaking my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, I need to know what happened. I need to know why." "Sarah, I'll be careful," I promised, "but I'm not running. Not again." After I hung up, I sat in that attic until dawn broke through the dirty window. The photo album open in my lap, studying the scratched-out faces, looking for clues in the damaged images. Somewhere in this town, someone knew exactly what happened to my birth parents. Someone had been carrying that secret for 23 years, and they were terrified I was about to remember. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work. Linda, the head librarian, sounded relieved. "Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. We'll manage." I spent the morning at the town records office. The clerk, a nervous man named Douglas, tried to tell me they were closed for maintenance. I sat in the lobby and said I'd wait. After an hour, he gave up and let me in. The records for October 31st, 2001 were suspiciously thin. The fire report was barely 2 pages. Gas leak, accidental, case closed. But the coroner's report, that told a different story. "Accelerant found on all 3 bodies," I read aloud. Douglas flinched at his desk. Doors and windows locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. It didn't make sense. If someone had killed them, how did they get out? And why lock them in? Unless they were hiding, I said. Douglas's pencil snapped in half. They locked themselves in. They were hiding from someone. "You should go," Douglas said quietly. "Please, for your own good. You know what happened." He was already shaking his head, gathering up papers, shoving them into random drawers. "I don't know anything. I wasn't even living here then. But you know who was. You know who." The door burst open. Sheriff Patterson filled the doorway, all 6'4" of him. I'd seen him around town, always watching from his cruiser, always 1 street behind me. "Miss Chen, heard you were feeling under the weather. Just doing some genealogy research," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes flicked to the papers on the desk. The fire report, the photos. His jaw tightened. "Town records office is closed today. Douglas here forgot to put up the sign." Douglas was nodding frantically. Yes, I forgot. So sorry, we're closed." I gathered the papers slowly. "I'll just make copies." "No need." The sheriff's hand covered the documents. "If you're interested in town history, I'd be happy to tell you about it. Over coffee. Right now." It wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, we sat in the back booth of the diner, the one I'd sat in my first week, the one from the photo album. Janet poured coffee with her usual shaking hands, then disappeared into the kitchen. "You look just like her," Sheriff Patterson said finally. "Your birth mother. Same eyes. Same determination. You knew them." Everyone knew the Chens. They'd only been here 6 months, but small town. They ran the Chinese restaurant where the pizza place is now. Good people. Quiet. Kept to themselves mostly, but friendly enough. Then why did someone kill them? He stirred his coffee for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Your mother, she saw something she shouldn't have. October 29th, 2 nights before the fire. She was taking out the trash behind the restaurant when she witnessed an incident. What kind of incident? The kind that ends with someone buried in the woods. His voice was flat, matter of fact. She saw faces, recognized them, prominent members of our community disposing of a problem. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Murder. She witnessed a murder. She did what anyone would do. She called the police, except the police were involved. I finished. He nodded slowly. Not me. I was just a deputy then. But my boss, Sheriff Coleman. He was one of the faces she saw, along with Judge Morrison, Mayor Blackwood, half the town council. So they killed her. Killed my whole family. No. He leaned forward. That's just it. They didn't. They tried to buy her silence first, offered money, threats. Your parents were packing to leave town when what? When the real killer decided 3 witnesses were too many. He pulled out a faded photo, a family portrait. This was the man they buried in the woods. Tom Morrison, the judge's son, serial rapist, had been hunting women across 3 counties. They caught him with his latest victim. She didn't survive. The town leaders, they decided to handle it quietly, avoid the scandal. Vigilante justice. Until your mother complicated things. And then someone decided the only way to keep the secret was to eliminate everyone who knew. Who? He met my eyes. That's the thing, Miss Chen. We never found out. The fire was too clean, too professional, someone with knowledge. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look accidental. But you all suspected. Everyone suspected everyone. The whole town fell apart with paranoia. Who was the killer among us? Who had killed the Chens? Was it one of the original group tying up loose ends? Was it someone else entirely? 23 years, and we still don't know. I stared at the photo of Tom Morrison. Young, handsome, dead. That's why everyone's terrified of me. They think I know something, or that I'm here to find out. Are you? I thought about it, really thought about it. My birth parents, strangers whose faces had been scratched from photos, had died for witnessing a crime. The whole town had been complicit in covering it up, and someone had murdered them for it. I don't know, I admitted. I didn't even know they existed until this week. My advice? Sheriff Patterson stood, threw money on the table. Leave town, tonight, don't look back. Some secrets are better buried. But as he walked away, I noticed something. His hands, they were shaking. Just like Janet's, just like everyone's in this town. They weren't just afraid I'd learn the truth. They were afraid the killer was still among them. Still watching. Still ready to eliminate anyone who got too close. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. Not this time. My birth parents had died trying to do the right thing. The least I could do was find out who killed them. I started with the photo album, studying every picture, every scratched-out face, looking for patterns, for clues. And then I found it. One photo. The Halloween parade, October 30th, 2001. The night before my parents died. In the background, barely visible, a figure. Face not scratched out because it was too blurry to identify, but something about the posture, the way they stood, the way they watched. I'd seen that exact stance recently, that exact tilt of the head. My blood ran cold as I realized who had killed my parents, who had been living in this town for 23 years, watching, waiting, making sure the secret stayed buried. And now they knew I was getting close. The lights in my house went out. All at once, I heard the back door creak open. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. A voice from the darkness. Familiar. Too familiar. "Hello, Sarah. I've been waiting for you to remember." I grabbed my phone. No signal, of course. I don't remember anything, I called out, backing towards the front door. But you've been asking questions, just like your mother. Too many questions. The front door wouldn't budge. Locked. But I hadn't locked it. It was you, I said. 23 years ago, you killed them. A soft laugh. Someone had to protect this town's secret. Someone had to make the hard choice. I recognized the voice now. Knew why those hands shook when they poured my coffee. Not from fear, from guilt. Janet, the diner waitress. Always there. Always watching. Always serving coffee to everyone who mattered. Hearing every conversation. Knowing every secret. They were going to destroy everything. Janet stepped into the moonlight, streaming through the window. She held something in her hand. Judge Morrison, Mayor Blackwood, they weren't bad men. They just made one mistake. Protecting this town from Tom. And your parents, they would have ruined it all. So you burned them alive. I gave them a choice. Leave town and never speak of it, or face the consequences. They chose to call the FBI. They forced my hand. And now, you'll kill me too? She tilted her head. That same tilt from the photo. I've grown fond of you, Sarah. These past weeks, you're nothing like her. You don't remember. You could leave. Tonight. Drive away and never come back. Or you'll have an accident, gas leak, just like your parents. The sheriff will investigate, find nothing. The town will mourn, life will go on. I thought about running, thought about fighting, thought about my parents. Both sets and the choices they'd made. No, I said quietly. I'm done running from the truth. Janet sighed, just like your mother. She raised her hand, a lighter, the smell of gasoline suddenly overwhelming. The house is already soaked, she said sadly. I did it while you were at the diner. I'm truly sorry, Sarah. You seem like a lovely girl. The lighter sparked, but I was already moving. 23 years ago, a 4-year-old girl had escaped a fire, had survived when she shouldn't have. Maybe it was muscle memory, maybe it was luck, or maybe it was something else. I crashed through the window as the room erupted in flames. Glass shattered. Pain bloomed across my arms and face, but I was out, rolling on the grass, running. Behind me, Janet screamed. Not in anger, in fear. The fire had spread too fast, caught her clothing. Her carefully planned murder becoming her own trap. I could have kept running, should have. Instead, I turned back, grabbed the garden hose, tried to spray her through the broken window. But the flames were too high, too hot. By the time the fire department arrived, by the time Sheriff Patterson found me sitting on the lawn, covered in cuts and soot, it was over. Janet didn't make it out. They found evidence in her house later. Journals. Detailed accounts of October 31st, 2001. How she drugged my parents' tea at the diner. Locked them in their home, set the fire. How she'd almost left me there too. But couldn't bring herself to kill a child. Small mercy, Sheriff Patterson said. Smallest mercy in the world. The town knew within hours. 23 years of fear and suspicion finally had an answer. Janet. Sweet, nervous Janet, who served coffee and kept secrets and killed anyone who threatened the town's stability. I left Millbrook the next morning, but not like my adoptive parents had hoped, not running, walking, head high. The truth, finally in the light. Some people say I should have stayed. Helped the town heal, but I'd given them what they needed. Answers. The rest was up to them. I drove back to Boston. Back to my parents. The ones who raised me, who loved me, who protected me from a truth too heavy for a child to bear. We talked for hours. About memory, about family, about the choices we make to protect the ones we love, and sometimes, late at night, I think about Millbrook, about the people still living with their secrets, about Janet, who died in the fire she started, about my birth parents who died for doing the right thing, but mostly, I think about the fact that I survived, twice, against all odds. And I wonder, was it really just luck, or is there something else? Something in the smoke and flames that protected me, something that brought me back to Millbrook after all these years, something that made sure the truth finally came out. I don't have those answers, maybe I never will. But if you've made it this far, if you've heard my whole story, I need to know. What do you think? Why did I survive when no one else did? Why did I come back to the one place I should have stayed away from? And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. In Janet's journal, the entry from the night of the fire, she wrote something that still haunts me. The little girl saw me through the smoke, looked right at me, and I could have sworn she smiled. Like she knew, like she'd always known, like she'd come back for me one day. Did 4-year-old me somehow know? Did I remember, deep down, who killed my parents? Is that why I really came back? I need to know what you think. Because sometimes I have dreams. Dreams where I'm 4 years old again, standing in a burning house, watching a woman pour gasoline. And in those dreams, I'm not afraid. In those dreams, I'm waiting. Leave a comment below. Tell me your theory, because I have a feeling this isn't over. The secret's out. But secrets have a way of breeding more secrets. And Millbrook has plenty more where that came from. What do you think they're still hiding? I guess we'll find out together. Story number 2. My grandmother's estate sale was supposed to be simple. One weekend, clear out the house, sell what we could, donate the rest. But that was before I found the note, tucked behind a framed photo of her wedding day. 4 words that made my blood run cold. The carpets remember everything. If you're listening to this right now, lying in bed, maybe you should check the patterns on your floor. Because what I discovered in that old Victorian house in Burlington, Vermont, changed how I see every woven thread, every repeating design. Some patterns aren't just decoration. Some patterns are messages, and some messages should never be decoded. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I want followers, but because you need to know what to look for. You need to be warned. And if you hear something familiar in my story, something that reminds you of your own home, please leave a comment. We need to find each other. We need to compare notes. Because I don't think my grandmother was the only one who knew. And now, the story begins. The October rain drummed against the windows of my grandmother's house as I stepped inside for the first time in 3 years. The smell hit me first. That unique mixture of lavender potpourri, old books, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. Like wool that had been stored too long in darkness. "Julia, you made it." My cousin Mark emerged from the dining room, dust motes swirling around him in the afternoon light. Mom's upstairs going through jewelry. Dad's in the basement. They left us the main floor. I nodded, setting down my coffee from the Burlington Bagel Bakery. The warmth from the cup was already fading. Everything in this house felt cold now, without Grandma Rose's presence to warm it. "Where should I start?" I asked. Mark shrugged. "Living room's all yours. I'll tackle the kitchen. Estate sale company comes tomorrow at 9, so whatever we want to keep has to be decided today," I finished. We'd been over this plan a dozen times. The living room stretched before me, exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Floral wallpaper, heavy wooden furniture, and carpets. So many carpets. Persian rugs layered over Turkish kilims. Runners stretching down hallways. Even small prayer rugs hung on walls as decoration. Grandma Rose had been a collector. She'd traveled the world in her youth. before settling in Vermont, before marrying Grandpa, before whatever made her write that note. I pulled it from my pocket again. Her handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. The carpets remember everything. At first, I thought it was dementia, the mind playing tricks. But Grandma had been sharp until the end. Even at 93, she could recall every detail of her travels, every story behind each rug she'd collected. I started with the large Persian in the center of the room. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers over the intricate patterns, geometric shapes interwoven with floral motifs. The wool felt strange under my touch, almost warm, almost alive. That's when I noticed it. The pattern wasn't random. Hidden within the traditional Persian design were irregularities, intentional breaks in the symmetry. At first glance, they looked like weaving errors, but as I traced them with my finger, they formed letters. H, E, L, Julia? Mark's voice from the kitchen made me jump. You want Grandma's cast iron skillet? Sure, I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. I kept tracing. Dachi, help me. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering. The letters were subtle, woven into the design so carefully that you'd never notice unless you were looking, unless you were touching, unless you knew to search. I forced myself to breathe, counted to 10. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a maker's signature. Maybe the second rug, a smaller Turkish piece near the fireplace, had irregularities too. This time, the message was longer, harder to trace. My fingers trembled as I followed the patterns. She sees through the weave. A door slammed upstairs. My aunt's footsteps crossed the ceiling above me. Normal sounds, normal house, but nothing felt normal anymore. I moved to the runner in the hallway. Another message. The patterns spread like roots. The bathroom mat, feeding on memories. By the time I reached the study, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely trace the letters. This carpet, an antique Azerbaijani piece, had the longest message yet. Rose brought us back. Rose fed us stories. Rose taught us to remember. Now Rose is gone. Who will feed us now? Julia? I spun around. Mark stood in the doorway, concern creasing his forehead. You okay? You look. The carpets, I whispered. Look at the patterns. Really look. He frowned, but knelt beside me. I guided his fingers to the first irregularity. Watched his expression change as he traced the letters. Watched the color drain from his face. What the? He jerked his hand back. Is this some kind of joke? Check the others, I said. Every carpet in this house, they all have messages. For the next hour, we worked in silence. Mark took the upstairs while I finished the main floor. We met in the kitchen, comparing notes on Grandma's old grocery list pad. 47 carpets, 47 messages, and they told a story. According to the messages, it started in 1962. Grandma Rose, young and adventurous, traveling through Eastern Europe with a humanities grant. She'd been studying traditional textile techniques, documenting dying art forms, in a village whose name the carpets wouldn't reveal. She met them, the weavers. The weavers were hungry, one carpet explained. Centuries of stories stopped. No one remembered the old ways. Another message. Rose knew the words. Rose spoke the patterns. Rose woke us up. This is insane, Mark muttered, but he kept reading, kept tracing. The story emerged in fragments. The weavers weren't human. They were something older, something that lived in the space between threads. They fed on stories, on memories, on the act of remembering itself. For generations, people had fed them through their carpets, weaving tales into textiles, creating patterns that were more than decoration. but modernization killed the tradition. The weavers began to starve, until Rose arrived. Rose who understood, Rose who made a deal. She would feed us, one carpet in the guest bedroom declared, bring us to a new land, give us new stories in exchange. In exchange for what? I asked the empty room. The answer was in Grandma's bedroom, the massive antique rug beside her bed, the one she'd brought back from that first trip, had the longest message of all. In exchange, we would remember. Every moment, every word, every secret. When Rose grew old, when her mind began to fade, we would hold her memories safe. We would give them back to her, thread by thread, night by night, until the end. I thought of Grandma's last years, how she'd insisted on keeping all her carpets, how she'd spend hours sitting on them, running her hands over the patterns, smiling at memories the rest of us thought were lost to age. She wasn't senile, Mark said quietly. She was communing with them, but there was more. The carpets in the attic, dusty and forgotten, held darker messages. The hunger grows. Rose's stories are finite. We need new feeders, new rememberers. And then, in a small prayer rug tucked behind old Christmas decorations, the granddaughter has the gift. We felt her touch years ago. She sees the patterns. She can feed us. The granddaughter, me, I remembered now, visiting as a child, tracing the carpet patterns while Grandma told stories, how the designs seemed to shift under my fingers, how I'd sometimes hear whispers in the wool. Grandma always said I had the touch. I thought she meant I was careful with her antiques. We need to burn them, Mark said suddenly. All of them. Tonight. But even as he spoke, I noticed something. His hand rested on the kitchen rug, fingers unconsciously tracing patterns. His eyes had gone distant. Mark? He blinked, shook his head. Sorry, I just remembered something. From when we were kids, that time we built a fort in the living room. Using Grandma's carpets as walls, I finished. We'd gotten in trouble for that. But there's more, he said slowly. Details I'd forgotten. The way the sun came through the window, the song on the radio, even what Grandma was cooking for dinner, pot roast with those little pearl onions. How can I remember that so clearly? That was 25 years ago. I looked down. The kitchen rug's pattern swirled beneath us. New irregularities had formed. Fresh messages. We taste the grandson's memories, too. Sweeter for being forgotten. Richer for being recovered. Get off the rug, I said urgently. Mark, get off the... But he was already tracing again. Eyes unfocused, lost in recollection. That's when I understood. The weavers didn't just store memories, they consumed them, digested them. And in return, they could give them back. Enhanced, clarified, more real than reality. It was a symbiosis, a trade. But like any deal with something inhuman, there was a catch. I found it in Grandma's journal, hidden in the false bottom of her sewing box. The entries started hopeful. October 1962. The weavers are magnificent. They've preserved stories from centuries ago. Through them, I can experience the lives of countless souls. But over the years, the tone changed. March 1987. They're always hungry now. My own memories aren't enough. They want the children's too. I catch them reaching through the patterns when Julia visits. December 1999. I've made a mistake. They don't just remember. They reshape. The memories they return aren't always true, but they feel true. More true than truth. August 2018. I can't tell anymore which memories are mine and which are theirs. Did I really travel to Morocco? Did I have a sister who died young? The carpets insist I did. The patterns prove it. but the photographs say otherwise. The final entry was dated a week before her death. October 2024, they're preparing for the transfer. They've chosen Julia. She has the gift, the touch. I've tried to warn her, but the words come out wrong. The patterns won't let me speak clearly. All I can do is leave clues. Hope she understands. Hope she's stronger than I was. The carpets remember everything. But memories can lie. I looked up from the journal. Mark was on his hands and knees, face pressed against the living room Persian, whispering to it. Or maybe it was whispering to him. Mark! I grabbed his shoulder, tried to pull him away. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. I can see her, Julia, Mom, before the divorce, when she still smiled, when she still loved Dad. It's all here, preserved, perfect. Those aren't real memories, I said. The carpets change things. I don't care. He pressed his palms flat against the wool. I want to remember her happy. I want to remember when we were a family. The patterns beneath his hands began to shift, swirl. New messages formed. The grandson agrees. The grandson feeds us willingly. The grandson understands the trade. Mark, no. But he was already sinking into it. His eyes rolled back. His breathing grew shallow. And the carpets began to glow, faintly, like embers in wool. I heard footsteps on the stairs. My aunt's voice. Kids, everything okay down there? Think. The journal mentioned something. A way to break the connection. But the pages were faded, water damaged. I could only make out fragments. Salt circles. Disrupts the weave. Running water. They cannot cross. Speak the pattern backward. Unraveling. Salt. We had salt in the kitchen. I ran, grabbed the container, and poured a circle around Mark. The effect was immediate. He gasped, blinked, looked around in confusion. What? What was I doing? We're leaving, I said. Now, all of us. But when I turned toward the stairs, my aunt and uncle were already there, standing on the landing, each holding a carpet. Their eyes were vacant, hungry. The weavers need feeding, my aunt said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. Rose kept them satisfied for 60 years, but Rose is gone. The family must continue the tradition. Stay back, I warned, holding up the salt container. My uncle smiled, a wrong smile, too wide. Salt only works on the carpets, dear one. Not on those of us who've already made the trade, who've already given ourselves to the pattern. They descended the stairs, slowly, inevitably. Behind me, Mark whimpered. The salt circle held him, but it also trapped him, and I was running out of salt. That's when I remembered something else from Grandma's journal. Something about speaking the pattern backward. Unraveling. The nearest carpet, a small Persian runner, had a simple message. Feed us. Sudif, I said aloud. Nothing happened. My aunt and uncle were halfway down the stairs now. More footsteps above. How many family members had already been taken? How many were now part of the pattern? Think. The messages weren't just words. They were woven into the design itself. The pattern was the language. I dropped to my knees beside the runner, traced the letters backward. Not just reading in reverse, but following the thread path in reverse. Undoing the weave with my finger. The carpet shuddered. No! My aunt lurched forward. You don't understand what you're doing. The memories, all the memories. I kept tracing, backward, unmaking. The wool began to fray beneath my touch, threads snapping, patterns dissolving, and with them, something else dissolved too. My aunt's face flickered. For a moment I saw her as she truly was. Older, grayer, the false youth the carpets had given her melting away. The dining room rug, I told Mark urgently, trace its pattern backward, unmake it. He didn't question, just crawled out of the salt circle and began working. The house groaned. 47 carpets, 47 patterns, all interconnected, all part of the same vast design, and we were pulling the thread that would unravel it all. My uncle tried to stop me, but his movements were sluggish now, uncertain. The carpets that commanded him were coming undone. "You're destroying centuries of knowledge," he gasped. "Stories that exist nowhere else, memories of the dead. All of it will be lost." Maybe he was right. Maybe we were burning a library, but some knowledge, some memories, they're too dangerous to preserve. They take more than they give. They hollow you out and fill you with beautiful lies. We worked faster. Aunt and uncle collapsed, freed but unconscious. Other family members stumbled down the stairs, confused, frightened, but human again. The carpets fought back. New messages appeared. "Stop, please, we meant no harm. We only wanted to remember to be remembered." For a moment I hesitated, and they sounded sad, lonely, ancient beings starving in a modern world that had no place for them. Then I thought of Grandma, spending her final years unsure which memories were real, trading her authentic life for enhanced recollections, becoming a fiction of herself. I kept unraveling. The last carpet was the one in Grandma's bedroom, the original, the one that started it all. Its pattern was complex, layered, a masterwork of deception. Mark and I traced it together, backward, inward, undoing decades of weaving. Our fingers bled from the rough wool. Our eyes burned from focusing on the intricate design. But we didn't stop. The final thread snapped. Silence, then whispers. Not from the carpets, from the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. The weavers, exposed, formless, dispersing like smoke. We only wanted to remember, to be remembered. Is that so wrong? And then they were gone, really gone, taking with them all the false memories, the enhanced recollections, the beautiful lies. My family woke as if from a dream, confused but free. We spent the rest of the night sorting through what was real, what was ours, what had been fabricated. It was less than we'd thought, but more than we'd feared. And it was true, authentically, painfully true. We donated the carpets to the estate sale, all of them, even the valuable antiques. Let someone else deal with the empty patterns, the silent wool. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, did we do the right thing? Those ancient beings who only wanted to preserve stories, did they deserve to be unraveled, erased? And more troubling, why do I sometimes catch myself tracing patterns in the air? Why do my fingers itch for wool and thread? Why do I dream of weaving? The weavers are gone, I tell myself that. The carpets are just carpets now, but I've started noticing things. Patterns in wallpaper, repetitions in tile, designs that seem almost intentional, almost alive. Maybe the weavers aren't gone. Maybe they just found new homes, new forms, new ways to feed. Maybe they're in your home right now, in your curtains, your bed sheets, your clothes, waiting, watching. Hungry, check your patterns. Trace them carefully. See if they spell out words, messages, invitations. And if they do, you have a choice. Feed them or free them. Remember or unravel. Just know, some trades can't be undone. Some patterns, once seen, can't be unseen. And some memories, even false ones, might be better than the truth. If you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then you understand. You've felt it too, that pull toward the patterns, that hunger for enhanced memories. Leave a comment. Tell me what you found. What messages hide in your home? We unraveled the weavers in Burlington. But Burlington was just one house, one family, one collection. How many more are out there? How many of you are tracing patterns right now? Feeling that warm wool beneath your fingers? Hearing those whispered promises of perfect recall? Subscribe to this channel. Share this story, not because I want fame, but because we need to map this, track it, understand how far the weavers have spread. And if your carpets start responding, if the patterns begin to shift, remember, you can always unravel, you can always trace backward, you can always choose the messy truth over the beautiful lie. But will you? Will you really? Or will you sink your fingers deep into the wool, close your eyes, and let the patterns tell you who you wish you were? The choice is yours. The weavers are patient, and the carpets remember everything. 3 months later, that's when the packages started arriving. The first one showed up on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name, written in shaky handwriting that looked disturbingly like Grandma Rose's. Inside, a small square of carpet, maybe 4 inches by 4 inches, Persian wool, antique, no message in the pattern. At least, not at first. I threw it away, took it straight to the dumpster behind my apartment building in Boston. Went back to my normal life, my normal job at the museum, my normal existence where carpets were just carpets. But that night, I dreamed of the weavers. They weren't angry. That's what surprised me. They were grateful. "You freed us," they whispered through the dream threads, from forms that had grown stale, from patterns that had become prisons. Now we can become something new. I woke to find the carpet square on my nightstand. The second package arrived a week later. This time, I was ready. I didn't even open it, straight to the dumpster. Then I doused it with lighter fluid, watched it burn, watched the smoke curl up into the night sky, forming shapes that almost looked like, no, I was being paranoid, seeing patterns where none existed. But the dreams grew stronger, more vivid. Each night the weavers showed me things, not memories this time, possibilities, futures woven from probability threads. We learned from Rose, they explained, evolved beyond simple memory keeping. Now we can weave what might be, what could be, what should be. The third package was different, heavier. When I opened it, carefully, with gloves, at arm's length, I found a loom. A small, antique traveling loom, the kind Grandma Rose might have used in her youth. And a note. This time in my own handwriting. "You know what to do." Except I hadn't written it, I was sure. Pretty sure. The problem with beings that could manipulate memory was, how could you ever be certain of anything? I hid the loom in my closet, refused to touch it. But my fingers, they remembered the motions. Muscle memory that wasn't mine. Knowledge seeping through dream channels. How to thread the warp. How to create the shed. How to weave patterns that were more than patterns. My coworker at the museum noticed first. "Julia, have you been taking weaving classes? Your restoration work on the Turkish textiles? It's incredible. Like you've been doing this for decades." Had I been? The days blurred together. Sometimes I'd find myself in the textile storage room with no memory of walking there. My hands would be moving over ancient carpets, tracing, learning, absorbing. The other packages came faster now, threads in colors I'd never seen, wool that felt alive, tools whose purposes I somehow understood, and always, that certainty that I was meant to use them. But I resisted, even as the dreams grew more insistent, even as the weavers showed me wonder after wonder. Cities built from story threads, symphonies woven in wool, entire worlds born from the loom's pattern. You have the gift, they reminded me nightly, stronger than Rose. You could weave new myths, new realities, new possibilities for humanity. Then Mark called. "Julia, I've been having dreams." My blood chilled. About the carpets. About weaving. I bought a loom, I don't know why. My hands just know what to do. And the things I'm creating. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They're beautiful. More beautiful than anything I've made before. My art career is taking off. Galleries are fighting over my textile pieces, but I don't remember making half of them. Stop, I told him. Whatever you're doing, stop. I can't. And Julia, I don't think I want to. The weavers, they're not what we thought. They're not parasites. They're teachers, guides. They want to share their knowledge, elevate us, help us create beauty beyond imagination. They want to use us. Maybe it's partnership. Maybe Grandma understood that at the end. Maybe that's why she kept them so long. I hung up, but his words haunted me. What if we'd been wrong? What if we'd destroyed something precious in our fear? That night, I found myself at the loom. My hands moved without conscious thought, thread over thread, pattern building pattern, and what emerged? It was a map, woven in dimensions I couldn't name, showing connections between every carpet we'd unraveled, every pattern we'd destroyed. They weren't gone. They'd simply dispersed, spread, seated themselves in 1,000 different forms. The weavers hadn't died. They'd evolved, adapted. No longer confined to carpets. They could inhabit any pattern now, any repetition, the grid of city streets, the rhythm of music, the structure of language itself. We hadn't freed ourselves. We'd freed them. And now they were everywhere, in everyone, waiting for those with the gift to give them form, to weave new possibilities from the threads of what could be. I understood then why the packages kept coming, why my hands knew the loom, why the dreams felt more real than waking. I was already one of them, had been since childhood, since the first time I'd traced Grandma's carpets and heard the whispers in the wool. The weavers hadn't chosen me. They'd recognized me, one of their own, lost in human form, forgetting my true nature. But now I remembered, or they helped me remember, or they created the memory. Did it matter which? My fingers flew across the loom, weaving my first true pattern, not a message, not a memory, but a doorway, a threshold between what is and what could be. When I finished, when I held up the small square of perfect pattern, I saw them clearly for the first time. The weavers, not monsters, not parasites, but artists of reality, shapers of possibility, beings of pure creative potential. Welcome home, they said. Welcome to the pattern. I could have resisted, even then, could have burned the loom, destroyed my creation, clung to my simple human existence, but why? When I could weave wonders, when I could create beauty that transcended physical form, when I could join the eternal dance of pattern and possibility, I made my choice. Or maybe the choice was made long ago, woven into my DNA, written in the carpet of my cells. Does it matter? I'm a weaver now. We all are. Those of us who hear the patterns, who feel the pull of the loom, who dream in dimensions of thread and time. We're not taking memories anymore. We're making futures, weaving tomorrows from the threads of maybe, creating new myths for humanity to grow into. And if you're listening to this, if you felt your fingers itch for invisible threads, if you've seen patterns in the static, heard rhythms in the silence, then you're one of us too. The loom is waiting. The threads are calling. The pattern is incomplete without you. Will you weave with us? Will you help us craft new realities? Will you join the eternal tapestry, or will you cling to your single thread of existence, never knowing what magnificent patterns you could have helped create? The choice is yours. It always was, even when it wasn't. The weavers are patient. The loom is eternal. And somewhere, in a dimension woven from pure possibility, Grandma Rose is smiling, still weaving, still teaching, still showing us that the pattern never truly ends. It only transforms. Subscribe if you feel the calling. Comment if you've found your loom. Share if you know others who hear the whispers. We're not recruiting, we're simply recognizing. finding our scattered threads, preparing to weave something unprecedented, something beautiful, something terrible, something necessary. The pattern is calling. And the carpets remember everything.
Story number 3.
I need you to pay attention to what I'm about to tell you, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And trust me, you'll wish you could. Last week I picked up a prescription that wasn't mine. A simple mix-up at the pharmacy, or so I thought. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the world around us. Before you think I'm crazy, just listen. And whatever you do, don't look too closely at the shadows in your room tonight. The story begins now. The envelope felt wrong in my hands. Too light for reading glasses, too heavy for contacts. I stood in the parking lot of Walgreens on Madison Street, staring at the white paper bag with someone else's name printed on the label. Sarah Chen, not me, I'm Michael Torres. The autumn wind whipped through the Cincinnati suburbs, carrying the smell of burning leaves and something else. Something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. I should have gone back inside right then. Should have handed the bag to the pharmacist and said there'd been a mistake, but the parking lot was already dark at 5:30, and I had a 40-minute drive back to my apartment in Clifton. I'll call them tomorrow, I thought. What harm could one night do? My apartment greeted me with its usual silence. Third-floor walk-up, creaky floors, neighbors who kept to themselves. I tossed my keys on the counter and set the prescription bag next to yesterday's mail. The label caught the kitchen light. Sarah Chen. Take 1 tablet daily for visual correction. Visual correction? That was odd. I'd never heard of pills for vision problems. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the bag. Inside was a small amber bottle, no bigger than a shot glass. The pills rattled when I shook it. Through the orange plastic I could see maybe 20 tablets, each one perfectly round and pearl white. The label had the same instructions, but no drug name, just a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me. I held the bottle up to the light. The pills seemed to shimmer, like they had tiny flecks of silver embedded in them. My rational mind said to put them back, seal the bag, return them tomorrow. But something else, something deeper, whispered a different suggestion. What if they really did correct vision? What if they showed you something your eyes couldn't normally see? I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know, but you have to understand. I'd been having these headaches for weeks, right behind my eyes, like pressure building up. My doctor said it was stress from work, too much screen time at the accounting firm. But what if it was something else? What if my eyes were trying to see something they couldn't quite focus on? The pill dissolved on my tongue instantly. No taste, just a cool sensation that spread through my mouth and down my throat. For a moment, nothing happened. I stood there in my kitchen, feeling like an idiot who'd just taken some stranger's medication. Then the world shifted. It started with the walls. The plain white paint I'd stared at for 2 years suddenly had texture. Not physical texture, something else. Like layers beneath layers. Each one slightly different from the last. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. The layers remained. I walked to the living room window. Outside, the streetlights cast their usual orange glow, but now I could see more. Shadows that didn't match the objects casting them. Movements in the periphery that vanished when I turned to look directly. And the sky. God, the sky. Between the stars were threads, impossibly thin, connecting each point of light like a vast web stretched across the darkness. They pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to see more clearly. That's when I saw the first one. It stood on the sidewalk below, right under the streetlight. At first glance, it looked like a person, tall, wearing what might have been a coat, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, neck bent at an angle that should have been impossible, and it wasn't moving, just standing there, watching my building. I jerked back from the window, heart hammering. When I looked again, the figure was gone, just empty sidewalk and shifting shadows, but I knew with absolute certainty, that it had been real. The kitchen felt different when I returned to it, smaller somehow, like the walls had crept inward while I was gone. The prescription bottle sat on the counter, innocent and terrifying. I picked it up, read the label again. Sarah Chen. Who was she, and why did she need pills that let you see? Whatever this was, sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those threads in the sky, that figure on the sidewalk. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and made coffee. The mug felt strange in my hands, like I was feeling it through gloves. Everything had that quality now, distant and immediate at the same time. I tried to work, pulled up spreadsheets on my laptop, but the numbers kept shifting. Not the actual values, something underneath them. Patterns that shouldn't have been there, connections between cells that had no formula linking them. I slammed the laptop shut. The sun rose slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to face this new world either. In daylight, the effects were subtle but persistent. People on the street had shadows that lagged behind their movements by half a second. Birds flew in formations that spelled out words in languages I didn't recognize. And everywhere, those things that weren't quite human watched from corners and doorways. I called in sick to work, told them it was a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head felt like it was splitting apart, trying to process information my brain wasn't designed to handle. I needed answers, needed to find Sarah Chen. The pharmacy was my first stop. The same teenager who'd handed me the wrong prescription was working the counter. His name tag said Derek, but when I looked at it through my new vision, other names flickered beneath. Older names, ancient names. I picked up the wrong prescription yesterday, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It belongs to Sarah Chen. Derek's fingers flew over the keyboard. Behind him, the pharmacy shelves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a rhythm I was beginning to recognize. It matched the pulse of those threads in the sky. "We don't have anyone by that name in our system," he said, frowning at the screen. "Are you sure that's—" "I have the bottle right here." I pulled it from my pocket, held it out. Derek's frown deepened. "Sir, that's just an empty prescription bottle. There's no label." I looked down. He was right. The label was gone, like it had never been there. But I could still see it, layered beneath the blank surface. Sarah Chen's name flickered in and out of existence. I left without another word. Outside, the world pressed in on me from all angles. Every surface had those layers now, those hidden depths that normal eyes couldn't see. A woman walked past pushing a stroller, but through my enhanced vision, the stroller was empty. Not just empty, it had never contained anything. She was pushing absence itself down the sidewalk. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe accept. "You took my pills." A woman's voice, tired and resigned. "I've been looking for you. Sarah Chen? Meet me at Fountain Square. 1 hour, and Michael. Don't take another pill, please. You're not ready for what comes next." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, wondering how she knew my name, wondering what she meant by "what comes next." But I was already walking toward my car. I needed answers, and she was the only one who might have them. Cincinnati's Fountain Square was crowded for a Tuesday afternoon. Office workers on lunch breaks, tourists taking photos, street musicians playing for tips. Through my altered vision, I could see the truth. Half the crowd wasn't really there. They were echoes, repetitions. The same dozen people copied and pasted to create the illusion of normalcy. I spotted her by the fountain. She looked normal enough. Asian woman in her 30s, professional clothes, tired eyes. But there was something else. A clarity to her that the other people lacked. Like she was more real than everything around her. "You can see them," she said without preamble. "The watchers, the threads, the layers." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "The pills were supposed to be destroyed," she continued. "I work for, let's call it a government agency. We've been tracking these anomalies for years. The pills were developed to help us see what's really there, but they were deemed too dangerous. The human mind isn't meant to process that much truth." "Truth about what?" She gestured at the crowd around us. "About the nature of reality, about how thin the veil really is, about what's waiting on the other side." As she spoke, I noticed the watchers drawing closer. They moved through the crowd like sharks through water. Always in the peripheral vision, never quite in focus. Sarah noticed too. Her hand tightened on her coffee cup. "We should go," she said. "They don't like being seen. And you've seen too much already." We left the square quickly, but not quickly enough. I could feel them following. Not walking, not exactly, more like sliding through the spaces between moments. Sarah led me through back streets and alleys I didn't know existed. The city looked different through my enhanced vision. Older, layered with decades of hidden history. "The pills were my project," she said as we walked. "I thought if we could see them, understand them, we could protect ourselves, but I was wrong. Seeing them gives them power, makes them more real, and once they know you can see them..." She didn't finish, didn't need to. I could feel their attention like cold fingers on my spine. We ended up in an abandoned warehouse near the river, the kind of place where people go to disappear. Sarah had supplies there. Water bottles, energy bars, and more of those pearl-white pills. "You'll need another dose soon," she said. "Once you start seeing, stopping doesn't make it go away. It just makes you vulnerable, unable to see them coming." "What are they?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the Ohio River moving past, but underneath that sound was something else. A whisper that might have been voices or might have been wind. "We don't know," she finally admitted. "They've always been here, living in the spaces we can't perceive. The pills just tune our vision to their frequency, like adjusting a radio to pick up a signal that was always there. And now, they know I can see them. Yes, and they don't like witnesses." Night fell hard and fast. Through the warehouse windows, I watched the city transform. The familiar skyline became something alien. Buildings connected by those silvery threads. Shadows moving in patterns that defied physics, and everywhere, the watchers gathered. "There's a way to stop seeing," Sarah said quietly. "But it's not pleasant, and it's not guaranteed to work." "What is it?" "You have to blind yourself to their frequency. Overload your enhanced vision until it burns out, like staring at the sun, but worse." I thought about my normal life, spreadsheets and coffee and Netflix. It seemed impossibly distant now, like a dream I'd had once and could barely remember. What's the alternative? You keep taking the pills, keep seeing. Eventually you learn to live with it, to ignore them like background noise, but you'll never be the same. Never be able to pretend the world is what you thought it was. A sound from outside made us both freeze. Not footsteps, something wet and sliding. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulled me deeper into the warehouse. We crouched behind a stack of molding crates as the door creaked open. The thing that entered wasn't trying to look human anymore. It flowed across the floor like oil, too many limbs extending and retracting. eyes that opened in places eyes shouldn't be. Through my enhanced vision, I could see its true form, and immediately wished I couldn't. It was looking for us, tasting the air with appendages that weren't quite tongues. Sarah pressed a finger to her lips, but I could see her hand shaking. We'd cornered ourselves. No back exit, no windows low enough to reach. Just us and it, and the terrible knowledge that we could see each other clearly. Time stretched like taffy. Seconds felt like hours as the creature searched the warehouse. It knew we were there, could probably smell our fear, but it was taking its time, enjoying the hunt. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound might as well have been a gunshot. The creature's head, if you could call it that, snapped in our direction. Too many eyes focused on our hiding spot. Sarah moved first. She threw something, a flash of white that exploded in brilliant light. The creature reeled back, screaming in frequencies that made my teeth ache. We ran, through the warehouse, out a side door I hadn't seen before, into the night. But the city had changed. The streets I'd driven for years were wrong now. Intersections where there shouldn't be any. Alleys that led to places Cincinnati had never contained. We were lost in our own hometown, pursued by things that shouldn't exist. We found refuge in an all-night diner on a street I didn't recognize. The fluorescent lights hummed with that familiar frequency I now knew meant safety. The watchers didn't like bright lights. Too much exposure, too much reality. The waitress who brought us coffee had been dead for 30 years. I could see through the illusion to the truth beneath. But I didn't say anything. Some truths weren't worth acknowledging. "It'll find us again," Sarah said. "They always do, once they have your scent. So, what do? We survive until dawn. Sunlight disperses them, forces them back to the edges. Then we figure out next steps. We left the square quickly, but not quickly enough. I could feel them following. Not walking, not exactly, more like sliding through the spaces between moments. Sarah led me through back streets and alleys I didn't know existed. The city looked different through my enhanced vision. Older, layered with decades of hidden history. "The pills were my project," she said as we walked. "I thought if we could see them, understand them, we could protect ourselves. But I was wrong. Seeing them gives them power, makes them more real. And once they know you can see them..." She didn't finish, didn't need to. I could feel their attention like cold fingers on my spine. We ended up in an abandoned warehouse near the river, the kind of place where people go to disappear. Sarah had supplies there. Water bottles, energy bars, and more of those pearl-white pills. "You'll need another dose soon," she said. "Once you start seeing, stopping doesn't make it go away. It just makes you vulnerable, unable to see them coming." "What are they?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the Ohio River moving past, but underneath that sound was something else. A whisper that might have been voices or might have been wind. "We don't know," she finally admitted. "They've always been here, living in the spaces we can't perceive. The pills just tune our vision to their frequency, like adjusting a radio to pick up a signal that was always there. And now they know I can see them. Yes, and they don't like witnesses." Night fell hard and fast. Through the warehouse windows, I watched the city transform. The familiar skyline became something alien. Buildings connected by those silvery threads. Shadows moving in patterns that defied physics. And everywhere, the watchers gathered. "There's a way to stop seeing," Sarah said quietly, "but it's not pleasant, and it's not guaranteed to work." "What is it?" "You have to blind yourself to their frequency, overload your enhanced vision until it burns out. Like staring at the sun, but worse." I thought about my normal life. Spreadsheets and coffee and Netflix. It seemed impossibly distant now. like a dream I'd had once and could barely remember. What's the alternative? You keep taking the pills, keep seeing. Eventually, you learn to live with it, to ignore them like background noise. But you'll never be the same. Never be able to pretend the world is what you thought it was. A sound from outside made us both freeze. Not footsteps, something wet and sliding. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulled me deeper into the warehouse. We crouched behind a stack of molding crates as the door creaked open. The thing that entered wasn't trying to look human anymore. It flowed across the floor like oil, too many limbs extending and retracting. Eyes that opened in places eyes shouldn't be. Through my enhanced vision, I could see its true form, and immediately wished I couldn't. It was looking for us, tasting the air with appendages that weren't quite tongues. Sarah pressed a finger to her lips, but I could see her hand shaking. We'd cornered ourselves. No back exit, no windows low enough to reach. Just us and it, and the terrible knowledge that we could see each other clearly. Time stretched like taffy. Seconds felt like hours as the creature searched the warehouse. It knew we were there, could probably smell our fear. But it was taking its time, enjoying the hunt. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound might as well have been a gunshot. The creature's head, if you could call it that, snapped in our direction. Too many eyes focused on our hiding spot. Sarah moved first. She threw something, a flash of white that exploded in brilliant light. The creature reeled back, screaming in frequencies that made my teeth ache. We ran, through the warehouse, out a side door I hadn't seen before, into the night. But the city had changed. The streets I'd driven for years were wrong now. Intersections where there shouldn't be any. Alleys that led to places Cincinnati had never contained. We were lost in our own hometown, pursued by things that shouldn't exist. We found refuge in an all-night diner on a street I didn't recognize. The fluorescent lights hummed with that familiar frequency I now knew meant safety. The watchers didn't like bright lights, too much exposure, too much reality. The waitress who brought us coffee had been dead for 30 years. I could see through the illusion to the truth beneath. But I didn't say anything. Some truths weren't worth acknowledging. "It'll find us again," Sarah said. "They always do, once they have your scent." So, what do? We survive until dawn. Sunlight disperses them, forces them back to the edges. Then, we figure out next steps. We left the square quickly, but not quickly enough. I could feel them following. Not walking, not exactly. More like sliding through the spaces between moments. Sarah led me through back streets and alleys I didn't know existed. The city looked different through my enhanced vision. Older, layered with decades of hidden history. "The pills were my project," she said as we walked. "I thought if we could see them, understand them, we could protect ourselves. But I was wrong. Seeing them gives them power, makes them more real. And once they know you can see them..." She didn't finish, didn't need to. I could feel their attention like cold fingers on my spine. We ended up in an abandoned warehouse near the river, the kind of place where people go to disappear. Sarah had supplies there. Water bottles, energy bars, and more of those pearl-white pills. "You'll need another dose soon," she said. "Once you start seeing, stopping doesn't make it go away. It just makes you vulnerable, unable to see them coming." "What are they?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the Ohio River moving past, but underneath that sound was something else. A whisper that might have been voices or might have been wind. "We don't know," she finally admitted. "They've always been here, living in the spaces we can't perceive. The pills just tune our vision to their frequency, like adjusting a radio to pick up a signal that was always there." and now they know I can see them. Yes, and they don't like witnesses. Night fell hard and fast. Through the warehouse windows, I watched the city transform. The familiar skyline became something alien. Buildings connected by those silvery threads. Shadows moving in patterns that defied physics. And everywhere, the watchers gathered. "There's a way to stop seeing," Sarah said quietly. "But it's not pleasant, and it's not guaranteed to work." "What is it?" "You have to blind yourself to their frequency, overload your enhanced vision until it burns out. Like staring at the sun, but worse." I thought about my normal life. Spreadsheets and coffee and Netflix. It seemed impossibly distant now, like a dream I'd had once and could barely remember. What's the alternative? You keep taking the pills, keep seeing. Eventually, you learn to live with it, to ignore them like background noise, but you'll never be the same. Never be able to pretend the world is what you thought it was. A sound from outside made us both freeze, not footsteps, something wet and sliding. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulled me deeper into the warehouse. We crouched behind a stack of molding crates as the door creaked open. The thing that entered wasn't trying to look human anymore. It flowed across the floor like oil, too many limbs extending and retracting. Eyes that opened in places eyes shouldn't be. Through my enhanced vision, I could see its true form, and immediately wished I couldn't. It was looking for us, tasting the air with appendages that weren't quite tongues. Sarah pressed a finger to her lips, but I could see her hand shaking. We'd cornered ourselves. No back exit, no windows low enough to reach. Just us and it, and the terrible knowledge that we could see each other clearly. Time stretched like taffy. Seconds felt like hours as the creature searched the warehouse. It knew we were there, could probably smell our fear. But it was taking its time, enjoying the hunt. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound might as well have been a gunshot. The creature's head, if you could call it that, snapped in our direction. Too many eyes focused on our hiding spot. Sarah moved first. She threw something, a flash of white that exploded in brilliant light. The creature reeled back, screaming in frequencies that made my teeth ache. We ran, through the warehouse, out a side door I hadn't seen before, into the night. But the city had changed. The streets I'd driven for years were wrong now. Intersections where there shouldn't be any. Alleys that led to places Cincinnati had never contained. We were lost in our own hometown, pursued by things that shouldn't exist. We found refuge in an all-night diner on a street I didn't recognize. The fluorescent lights hummed with that familiar frequency I now knew meant safety. The watchers didn't like bright lights. Too much exposure, too much reality. The waitress who brought us coffee had been dead for 30 years. I could see through the illusion to the truth beneath, but I didn't say anything. Some truths weren't worth acknowledging. "It'll find us again," Sarah said. "They always do, once they have your scent." So, what do? We survive until dawn. Sunlight disperses them, forces them back to the edges. Then we figure out next steps. We left the square quickly, but not quickly enough. I could feel them following, not walking, not exactly, more like sliding through the spaces between moments. Sarah led me through back streets and alleys I didn't know existed. The city looked different through my enhanced vision. Older, layered with decades of hidden history. "The pills were my project," she said as we walked. "I thought if we could see them, understand them, we could protect ourselves. But I was wrong. Seeing them gives them power, makes them more real, and once they know you can see them." She didn't finish, didn't need to. I could feel their attention like cold fingers on my spine. I stared at my coffee. watching the cream swirl in patterns that spelled out warnings in dead languages. How long have you been seeing them? 3 years. 3 years of this, of knowing that everything, everyone, is just a thin shell over something else, something worse. The diner clock said 3:17 a.m., peak hour for things that shouldn't be. Through the windows, I could see them gathering. Not just watchers now, other things that had noticed our presence, our ability to see. They pressed against the glass like moths drawn to flame. "I have more pills," Sarah said. "Enough to last a few weeks. After that, we find more, or we find a way to stop this." She laughed, bitter and broken. "There is no stopping it. There's just seeing or not seeing. And not seeing means being blind to what's hunting you." The lights flickered, just for a second, but long enough for something to slip inside. I saw it from the corner of my eye. A shadow that moved wrong, that bent light around it like a black hole. The dead waitress didn't notice. The other late-night patrons, were they even real? Continued their pantomime of normalcy. Sarah saw it too. Her hand found mine across the table, cold and trembling. The shadow was moving between the booths, searching, tasting. It would find us. They always found us. "When I say run," she whispered, "we go for the kitchen. There's always a back exit through the kitchen." The shadow paused 2 booths away. I could feel its attention like ice water in my veins. It knew we could see it, knew we were trapped. Now. We bolted from the booth, sending coffee cups crashing to the floor. The shadow lunged, impossibly fast, but the bright kitchen lights made it hesitate. We burst through swinging doors into a world of stainless steel and heat lamps. The cook looked up from the grill, and I immediately wished he hadn't. His face was wrong. Too many mouths, all of them smiling. Sarah didn't slow down. She grabbed a pot of boiling water from the stove and threw it at the cook thing. It screamed, a sound like grinding metal, and we pushed past toward the back door. Behind us, I could hear the shadow entering the kitchen, could feel the lights dimming under its presence. The alley was dark, narrow, filled with dumpsters and the smell of rotting food. We ran without direction, just away, always away. But the city kept changing around us. Streets that should have led to safety curved back on themselves. Buildings grew extra floors, sprouted doors that opened onto nothing. "This isn't Cincinnati anymore," I gasped. "Where are we?" "Same place," Sarah said. "Just deeper. The pills don't just let you see them. They let you see the places where reality gets thin, where their world bleeds into ours." We emerged onto a main street I almost recognized. Vine Street, but wrong. The buildings were too tall, the sky too low, and everywhere the watchers stood sentinel. They didn't chase anymore. Didn't need to. We were in their territory now. "There." Sarah pointed to a church across the street. "Consecrated ground. They can't enter." It was our only chance. We sprinted across empty lanes, past watchers who turned to track our movement but didn't follow. The church doors were locked. Of course they were. Sarah pulled out a set of lockpicks, hands steady despite everything. "You just carry those around? You learn to be prepared when you live like this." The lock clicked open just as the first shadow rounded the corner. We tumbled inside, slammed the door, collapsed against it, breathing hard. The church was empty, dust motes dancing in colored light from stained glass windows, but it felt safe, real in a way nothing had felt since I'd taken that first pill. We stayed there until dawn, huddled in a pew, watching the doors, waiting for something to break through, but nothing came. As the first rays of sunlight painted the windows gold, I felt the pressure ease. The enhanced vision was still there, but muted, like looking through sunglasses. "They're weaker during the day," Sarah explained. still there, but forced to hide deeper. It's the only time we can move freely. We need to find more people like us. There have to be others. There are. Scattered, hiding, trying to survive. Some go mad, some join them, become something else. I thought about the cook thing in the diner. Had it once been human? Someone who'd seen too much, been changed by the seeing. What about the people who made the pills? Your agency? Sarah's laugh was hollow. They tried to contain it, to study it safely, but you can't study something that exists partially outside reality. The facility was compromised. That's how the pills ended up in circulation. Someone thought destroying the evidence was enough. They didn't understand that once the door is opened. We left the church as the city woke up. In daylight, Cincinnati looked almost normal. Almost. But I could still see the threads connecting buildings. The shadows that didn't match their sources. The people who weren't really there. The pills had changed my vision permanently. Even when they wore off, some part of the sight remained. Sarah had a safe house. An apartment in Mount Adams with reinforced windows and lights that never turned off. It was small, cramped, but it felt secure. The walls were covered with maps, photos, newspaper clippings, all documenting the invisible invasion I was now part of. "This is my life now?" I asked. "This is our life, the seeing and the running and the knowing that everyone else is walking around blind." I sank onto the couch, exhausted beyond measure. Through the window I could see the city spread out below. My city, but not my city. Forever changed by one wrong prescription. That was a week ago. I'm still taking the pills. One each morning, like vitamins for a condition I never asked for. Sarah's teaching me how to survive. How to recognize safe places. How to avoid drawing their attention. How to live with the constant knowledge that reality is just a thin shell. We found 3 others so far. People who accidentally received the wrong prescription, or found pills in strange places, or were given them by someone who wanted them to see. We meet in bright places, share information, try to map the invasion we're witnessing. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night even more than the watchers. The pills are running out. Sarah's supply, my stolen bottle, the few we've found, may be enough for another month. After that, we either find more or face the slow fade back to blindness. And blindness means vulnerability, means not seeing them coming, means becoming another missing person statistic that nobody questions. So I keep taking them. Every morning, pearl white dissolution on my tongue, the world sharpening into terrible focus. I see them everywhere now, in reflections that don't match, in shadows that fall the wrong way, in the spaces between seconds where things move that shouldn't move. Sometimes I wonder about the first person to take these pills, the scientist or test subject who suddenly saw the truth. Did they try to warn others? Did anyone believe them? Or did they just disappear? Another casualty of knowing too much. Sarah says there might be a way to synthesize more pills. She has contacts, people who worked on the original project, but reaching them means traveling, means leaving the safe routes we've mapped, means risking exposure to things that have noticed our ability to notice them. I think about my old life sometimes, the spreadsheets and meetings and normal problems that seemed so important. It's still there, parallel to this nightmare, just out of reach. My coworkers probably think I had a breakdown. My family's leaving worried voicemails. But how can I go back? How can I pretend I don't see what's really there? The watchers are getting bolder. Every day they stand a little closer, stay visible a little longer, like they're testing our limits, seeing how much we can take before we break. And some do break. Sarah told me about a woman who took too many pills at once, trying to see deeper, trying to understand. They found her apartment empty except for shadows burned into the walls. shadows in shapes that shouldn't exist. It's nearly dawn now. I should sleep, but sleep brings dreams of threads in the sky and things with too many eyes. So I sit by the window, watching the city wake up, counting the watchers on the street below. 17 today. Yesterday there were 12. They're gathering, preparing for something, and we can see them doing it, but can't do anything to stop it. Because who would believe us? Who would take pills that reveal the horror underneath everything? But if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, maybe you understand. Maybe you've seen things that don't quite fit. Shadows that linger too long. People who aren't really there. Movement in the corner of your eye that vanishes when you turn. Maybe you're ready to see more. There's a prescription bottle in my hand. Sarah Chen's name has started to flicker again, becoming visible to normal eyes. Like the universe is trying to correct a mistake. Or maybe it's an invitation. A chance for someone else to join us in seeing what's really there. I could mail it to you, leave it somewhere you'd find it. A simple white bag, a stranger's prescription, an innocent mistake that changes everything. Would you take that first pill? Would you want to see? But I won't, because once you see them, they see you, and they never, ever stop watching. The sun's coming up now. Time to take my morning pill. Time to face another day of terrible clarity. Sarah's making coffee in the kitchen, planning our next move, pretending this is normal. We're adapting. Humans always adapt. But adaptation has a cost. Every day we become less like the people we were. More like something else. Something that can see too much. Something that lives in the spaces between normal and nightmare. The prescription bottle is empty now. Tomorrow, we start looking for more. Wish us luck, and whatever you do, if you ever pick up the wrong prescription at the pharmacy, if the pills inside look pearl white and seem to shimmer, if the label has a name that flickers in and out of existence, put it back. Walk away, forget you ever saw it. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some prescriptions change more than just what you see. They change what sees you back. But you want to know the worst part? The part that makes me question everything. Yesterday, I found my real prescription. The one I was supposed to pick up, reading glasses. Simple, normal, safe. I tried them on. The world blurred, shifted, returned to normal. For just a moment, the watchers vanished. The threads disappeared. The layers collapsed into single, simple surfaces. I could have lived in that blindness. Could have pretended the last week was just a breakdown, a hallucination, a bad dream. But then I saw Sarah, really saw her. Without the pills, without the enhanced vision, she wasn't there. Just empty space where I thought a person had been. All our conversations, our escape from the warehouse, our time in the safe house. Was any of it real? Am I alone in this? Have I been running from nothing? Hiding from my own fractured mind? I put the reading glasses away, took another pearl white pill. Sarah flickered back into existence, solid and real and terrified. She didn't know she'd vanished. Didn't know I'd seen the truth beneath the truth. Or maybe that's the real horror. Maybe the pills don't show us what's there. Maybe they create it. Maybe every person who takes them adds another layer to the nightmare. Another watcher to the streets. Another thread to the sky. Maybe we're not seeing an invasion. Maybe we're causing it. But I can't stop taking them now. None of us can. Because whether the watchers are real or not, whether we're seeing truth or creating madness, the fear is real, the running is real. The need to keep seeing is real. So, if you're still listening, if you've made it to the end, ask yourself one question. Is it better to see the monsters and know they're there, or to walk in blindness and hope they don't exist? Because once you start wondering, once you start looking closer at the shadows, once you notice the things that don't quite fit, you're already halfway to seeing. And they've already noticed you noticing. The prescription that changed what I see didn't just show me hidden truths. It showed me that truth itself is subjective, malleable, dangerous. And once you know that, once you really understand that reality is just consensus, well, sweet dreams. And try not to look too closely at the shadows tonight. You might not like what looks back. Wait, do you hear that? That sliding sound? Like something wet moving across floorboards? It's probably nothing. Probably just the building settling. Probably just my imagination. But if you're smart, you'll stop listening now. Close the video, forget this story. Go back to your normal life where shadows are just shadows and pills are just medicine. Because I can see them gathering outside my window more than yesterday, more than ever before. And I think they're coming for anyone who heard this. Anyone who knows, anyone who might start seeing. Run. Story number 4. The tracks appeared 3 days after my grandmother died. I know that sounds crazy. Trust me, I've been over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of what I found in those woods behind her old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. But some things don't follow the rules we think govern this world. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to do something for me. Right now, wherever you're listening to this, look down at your feet. Notice how when you walk, every footprint has a beginning and an end, a heel that touches down, toes that push off. Good. Remember that. Because what I found that October morning violated everything we understand about how things move through space. And if you're lying in bed right now, getting ready to sleep, maybe save this story for tomorrow, or don't. But don't say I didn't warn you when you hear footsteps in your hallway tonight that seem to come from nowhere. The story begins now. My name is David Chen, and 3 days after we buried Grandma Rose, I drove back to her farmhouse alone. The rest of the family had already picked through her belongings like vultures, taking the valuable antiques and leaving me with the house nobody wanted. A drafty old colonial on 40 acres of Pennsylvania woodland, miles from the nearest neighbor. Mom had warned me not to go alone. That place has always felt wrong, David, she'd said, pressing the keys into my palm at the funeral. Even when I was little, I never liked playing in those woods, but I needed the solitude. Grandma Rose had raised me for 3 years when Mom was going through her rough patch, and this house, it held memories I wasn't ready to share with anyone else yet. The October air bit at my face as I pulled into the gravel driveway. The house looked exactly as I remembered. White clapboard siding, black shutters, wraparound porch with that old swing where Grandma used to tell me stories about the things that lived in the woods. Stories I'd always assumed were just tales to keep a curious kid from wandering too far. I should have paid more attention to those stories. The inside smelled like lavender and old wood, with that underlying mustiness that comes from a house being closed up too long. I spent the first day just walking through rooms, remembering. The kitchen, where she taught me to make her famous apple pie. The living room, where we'd watch Jeopardy every night at 7:30. The narrow stairs that creaked on the 3rd and 7th step. It wasn't until the second morning that I noticed the tracks. I was having coffee on the back porch, watching the mist burn off the trees, when something caught my eye. There, in the dew-wet grass between the house and the forest edge, was a line of footprints. They started abruptly about 20 feet from the porch steps, as if someone had materialized out of thin air and led straight into the woods. My first thought was that someone had been snooping around the property. We'd had problems with people trying to break into empty houses in the area. I set down my mug and walked over to examine them more closely. The prints were wrong. They were human, definitely. Bare feet, adult-sized, with 5 toes clearly visible in the soft earth. But there was something about them that made my skin crawl. They were too deep, as if whoever made them weighed far more than any normal person, and the spacing was off. Each step was exactly the same distance apart, like they'd been measured with a ruler. But the strangest thing, they really did just start. No tracks leading up to that point. No disturbed grass showing where someone had walked before reaching the soft ground. Just boom. Footprints beginning in the middle of the yard like someone had been dropped from the sky. I followed them to the tree line, where they disappeared into the carpet of fallen leaves. The rational part of my brain was already making excuses. Maybe someone had walked across the grass when it was dry, and only this section showed prints. Maybe it was some kind of prank, but deep down, in that primitive part of our minds that still remembers when we were prey, I knew something was very wrong. That night, I barely slept. Every creaking board became footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows became something trying to get in. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and made coffee, sitting at Grandma's kitchen table with all the lights on. I kept thinking about those stories she used to tell, about the walking ones, she called them. Things that looked human but weren't, that could step between spaces like we stepped through doorways. I'd always loved those stories as a kid, begging her to tell me more even as they gave me delicious shivers. Now, staring out at the darkness beyond the kitchen window, they didn't seem so delicious anymore. When dawn finally came, I was ready. I'd found Grandma's old Polaroid camera in the hall closet, along with a tape measure and a notebook. If someone was playing games on my property, I was going to document everything. The footprints were still there, though the morning dew had softened their edges slightly. I photographed each one, measured the stride length, exactly 32 inches between each print, and sketched their orientation in my notebook. Then I followed them into the woods. The forest was different than I remembered. Quieter. The usual morning birdsong was muted, and my footsteps seemed to echo too loudly on the leaf-strewn path. The footprints continued in their impossibly straight line, never deviating, never showing any sign of the natural variation you'd expect from someone walking through uneven terrain. About a quarter mile in, I found where they ended. Or rather, where they didn't end. The tracks led to a small clearing I didn't remember from my childhood explorations. In the center was a fallen oak tree, its massive trunk creating a natural barrier. The footprints walked directly up to the trunk and continued on the other side. Not around, not over, through. I stood there for a long time staring at those impossible prints. Same depth, same spacing, same bare feet, as if whoever made them had simply passed through solid wood like it wasn't there. My hands shook as I took the photographs. The rational explanations were getting harder to maintain. I walked around the entire clearing, looking for any sign of disturbance, any indication that this was an elaborate hoax. That's when I found the second set. These started at the base of a large maple tree on the opposite side of the clearing. Not near the tree, at it. The first print was partially embedded in the bark, as if someone had stepped out of the tree itself. They led away in a different direction, deeper into the woods, maintaining that same mechanical precision. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to go back to the house, pack my things, and never return. But something made me follow those new tracks. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the memory of Grandma's voice telling me to be brave. Maybe I was just an idiot. The second trail led me places I definitely didn't remember. The trees grew closer together here, their branches forming a canopy so thick it felt like twilight despite the morning sun. The footprints never wavered, passing through undergrowth that would have forced any normal person to go around. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me or ahead, but above, to the side. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, maintaining that same measured pace as the prints I was following. 32 inches. Step. 32 inches. Step. I froze, holding my breath. The footsteps continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It was the silence of something waiting, watching. "Hello?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. No response. Just that oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. I took a step backward, leaves crunching under my boot. Immediately, the footsteps resumed, matching my pace exactly. I stopped. They stopped. I took 2 quick steps. So did they. That's when I ran. I didn't stop running until I burst through the back door of the house, slamming it behind me and throwing the deadbolt. My chest heaved as I leaned against the door, half expecting something to start pounding on the other side. Nothing came. Just my own ragged breathing and the ticking of Grandma's old clock in the hallway. I spent the rest of the day going through her things with new purpose. Not the valuable stuff my relatives had been after, but the boxes in the attic labeled papers and old things. If anyone had answers about what was happening on this property, it would be Grandma Rose. I found what I was looking for in a trunk that had belonged to my great-grandfather. Journals, dating back to the 1920s when he'd first bought this land. His careful handwriting documented the usual farm life, crop yields, weather, local gossip. But every so often, there were other entries. October 15th, 1923. Found tracks again near the north field. Martha says to leave out bread and salt. Seems like superstition, but I'll try anything to keep them away from the house. November 3rd, 1925. They're getting bolder. Samuel from the next farm says his boy saw one in broad daylight. Walked right out of the barn wall and across the yard before disappearing into thin air. We're putting up iron horseshoes over every door. December 20th, 1928. Martha insists we never follow the tracks. Says her grandmother knew someone who did. They found him 3 days later, standing in the middle of his field, eyes open but gone somewhere else. Never spoke again. Just stood there until he died. My hands trembled as I turned to the pages. Entry after entry described encounters with things that walked through solid objects, that left footprints in impossible places, that seemed to exist partially in our world and partially somewhere else. The most detailed entry was from 1931. Professor Whitmore from the university came to study our folklore. Cityman didn't believe until he saw them himself. He says the limestone caves under this whole area create what he calls thin places. Spots where the boundary between here and there gets soft. The walking ones use these paths, have been using them since before the Lenape were here. Whitmore thinks they're not malicious, just different, operating by different rules. But he also packed up and left real quick after seeing one face to face. Wouldn't say what he saw. I set the journal aside and rubbed my eyes. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, mass hysteria, anything but the truth. But I'd seen those tracks, heard those footsteps, and deep down I think I'd always known there was something different about this place. As darkness fell, I found myself checking and rechecking the locks. I hung an old horseshoe I'd found in the barn over the back door, feeling foolish but somehow comforted by the action. Then I settled in the living room with more of the journals, trying to find any information about how to make them stop, how to close whatever door had been opened. That's when the walking started. Not inside the house. I would have lost my mind entirely if that had happened. But outside, circling the building with those same measured steps, around and around, never varying in pace, never stopping. I sat frozen in Grandma's recliner, the journal clutched in my lap, as something walked endless loops around my inherited prison. The footsteps continued all night. I know because I never slept, never moved from that chair. Only when the first light of dawn touched the windows did they finally stop. I waited another hour before daring to look outside. The grass around the entire house was worn down in a perfect circle, as if something had walked that path 1,000 times in a single night. But there were no footprints, not one. That's when I understood. The prints only appeared where they chose to leave them. The rest of the time, they could walk wherever they wanted, invisible and untouchable, following rules I couldn't begin to understand. I should have left. Any sane person would have gotten in their car and never looked back. But two things kept me there: Grandma's memory and a single line I'd found in my great-grandfather's final journal entry. Rose knows how to make them leave. She learned from her mother, who learned from hers. The knowledge stays with the women. I pray she never needs to use it. Rose, my grandmother. I tore through her bedroom, searching for anything that might explain what he meant. In her jewelry box, beneath layers of costume pearls and tarnished silver, I found a small leather pouch. Inside was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age, covered in Grandma's careful script. It wasn't instructions exactly, more like a recipe: salt from the Dead Sea, iron filings, 3 drops of blood from the property owner. Other things too, herbs with names I didn't recognize, instructions about moon phases and sunrise times. At the bottom, she'd written, "They don't mean harm, they're just passing through." But sometimes a door opens too wide and too many come at once. This closes it. Use only if they start staying instead of walking. I looked out the window at the worn circle in the grass. Were they staying, or just walking with more enthusiasm than usual? The decision was made for me that night. I was in the kitchen, preparing the mixture according to Grandma's instructions. I'd had to drive 2 towns over to find some of the ingredients when I saw him. Or it. Or whatever the proper pronoun is for something that shouldn't exist. It stood at the edge of the porch light's reach, just visible through the window. Humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall. Joints bending in too many places. Skin that seemed to shift between solid and translucent. But it was the eyes that made me drop the mixing bowl. They were human eyes, familiar eyes. Eyes I'd seen in family photographs. Great-grandfather? The word came out as a whisper. The thing that might have been my ancestor tilted its head at an impossible angle. Then it smiled. A too wide smile with too many teeth, and took a step forward. Through the porch railing, through the wall. I scattered the half-mixed ingredients in pure panic, blood from my hastily pricked fingers splattering across salt and herbs. The effect was immediate. The thing stopped mid-step, half in and half out of my kitchen wall. Its expression went from that terrible smile to something like surprise. Then it stepped backward, pulling itself out of the wall with obvious effort. It stood on the porch for a moment, studying me with those familiar yet wrong eyes, before turning and walking away. Not disappearing, not vanishing into thin air, just walking, like a normal person leaving a normal house. I stood there shaking, surrounded by scattered salt and drying blood, as understanding dawned. The journal entry about the man who'd followed the tracks, who'd been found standing in his field with his mind gone. What if his mind wasn't gone? What if he'd gone with it, following those impossible footsteps to wherever they led? And what if, sometimes, things that walked away came walking back, changed by wherever they'd been? With trembling hands, I finished mixing Grandma's recipe properly this time. I followed her instructions exactly, walking the perimeter of the house at sunrise, sprinkling the mixture in an unbroken line. The morning air shimmered where the mixture fell, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. When I completed the circle, the world exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. A tension I hadn't even realized was there suddenly released. Birds started singing. A squirrel chittered from a nearby tree. The oppressive silence that had weighed on the property since I'd arrived finally lifted. I stayed one more night just to be sure. No footsteps, no circles, no things that used to be human standing at the edge of the light. Just normal night sounds and peaceful sleep. Before I left the next morning, I reburied the leather pouch in Grandma's jewelry box, along with a note of my own. Someone else might need it someday. The house would wait, like it always had, sitting on its thin place between here and there. I drive out to check on it sometimes. Once a month, maybe twice, making sure the barrier holds, that the footprints stay gone. Because here's the thing I realized, the thing that keeps me up some nights. Those footprints I found, the ones that started in the middle of the yard with no trail leading up to them, I'd assumed something had arrived, stepped into our world from somewhere else. But what if I had it backward? What if something had been walking in our world, invisible and untouchable, and those prints marked where it had left, stepped out of our reality and into somewhere else? And if that's true, how many invisible feet are walking around us right now, leaving no trace until they decide to step away? I told you at the beginning to look at your feet, to notice how every footprint has a beginning and an end. But now, I need you to think about something else. Think about all the footprints you've never seen. The ones that pass through your room at night, that circle your bed, that stand beside you when you think you're alone. They're there. They've always been there. Walking between spaces, following paths we can't see, operating by rules we don't understand. Most of the time, they just pass through. But sometimes they stay. So the next time you're walking alone and feel like someone's matching your steps, or when you wake up at night certain something just moved through your room, remember this story. Remember that not all footprints are meant to be followed, and not all doors are meant to be opened. But most importantly, remember this. If you ever inherit an old house on a thin place, where footprints appear from nowhere and lead to impossible places, make sure you know where your grandmother kept her recipes. Underscore 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 sweet dreams. If you can manage them. And hey, if this story kept you up tonight, or if you've ever experienced something you can't explain, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And some of your stories, they're scarier than anything I could write. Subscribe if you want to hear more true encounters with the impossible. Next week, I'm sharing something that happened to a forest ranger in Oregon. Let's just say, not all missing hikers are actually missing. Until then, check those footprints, all of them, even the ones you can't see.